Is
Actually, and
this?
that was my phone that we smashed in the film.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Again, sacrificing everything for the art. I love it. Hey everyone, this is David Stark from Watcher Pass. Today I'm talking to Sarah Jayne Portelli, the co-director of Machination, which is coming to digital on May 20th, 2022. It's an atmospheric horror film that looks at how the pandemic could have affected someone with a pre-existing trauma. I'm going to talk to her right now. And while you're watching, if you can like and subscribe to this channel, that would be fantastic. Also, a lot. Thank you. So thanks so much for joining me. This is Sarah Jayne Portelli, who is the co-director of Machination, which is coming to digital on May 20th, 2022. It is a psychological pandemic horror film that looks into kind of the effect that the pandemic and isolation can have on someone that has some, I don't know, pre-existing traumas, some past traumas, and it is just a very interesting, well-done indie film. So thank you so much for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me here.
Of course. So, I guess the first question is, like what inspired this film? If was this something that happened early in the pandemic? Was this maybe like partway through, or did you write this before? Like, are you clairvoyant? Like, what inspired the writing of this film? If you know.
So Ivan wrote, my partner Ivan from Nexus Production Group, he wrote the script. We were tossing around the idea at the same time when we were shooting our documentary Cats of Malta. So we were filming Cats of Malta like early Feb, which was like when the pandemic sort of like started coming out in Malta. So we were tossing around the idea then. So once the pandemic came out, because everyone in Malta was going crazy with conspiracy theories and 5G, and they're like, oh, COVID's like a distraction because they can bring in the 5G. And we were like watching all this stuff on the news, and that's when it sort of came about. And we were like obviously busy with Cats of Malta, and we said we want to write Machination and get the ideas down. So we did that as we were filming our documentary. And then after we wrapped on Cats of Malta, our documentary, we started preparing to shoot Machination.
That is scarily kind of, I don't know, a scary kind of realization of just how deep the pandemic went. And I think that that's amazing that kind of could foresee, I don't know, the direction, or at least kind of foresee some of the extremes that people went to during the pandemic. Did you change up the script and how it was shot, like as the pandemic continued, or was this original vision just kind of like the way that you went and just happened to kind of be a fairly realistic, or at least a fairly accurate looking representation of what happened?
It's a mix, because we started filming, like the pandemic was happening in Malta. So we shot during the pandemic. They didn't have a lockdown per se in Malta. They were just closing shops, and like nail salons, hairdressers and things like that were closed. But like basic shops, we could still go to the supermarket, but we were told to stay indoors, but we were not trapped in, like our family in Australia was trapped, like they couldn't go anywhere.
Oh,
They
wow.
could only walk around the block. So it wasn't that bad for us. And the story kind of changed because we already work with improvised films. So we make improvised films, Nexus Production Group. So for us, the story kind of evolved. So it started off with a woman who was very like into these conspiracy theories, and she was paranoid about everything. We kind of blended it on a few people that we saw, or like, like Ivan's mum's very like worried about everything. The world's going to end. This is happening. So we wanted to have her like that. And then we had all this tradition and stuff in there. And then we thought, let's tone it down a bit. And when we were working with Steffi, who we cast as Maria, we started to work more on the psychology of Maria, the character. And when we gave her the backstory, which you see like about halfway, you start to see why she's kind of like acting the way she is. Like what, not just the pandemic, but her past trauma is coming back to her. She remembers stuff from her past. So it just started blending in with that. And because it was improvised, we were working with Steffi and the emotions were coming out. And Maria sort of evolved and changed. And so did the end of the film, actually, because that was Steffi's idea of it, how the character would actually go.
Oh, interesting. And so like it sounds like this was kind of early-ish in the pandemic. So I mean, was it difficult to make? It sounds like Malta didn't have as severe of a lockdown as other places, but I mean, it's still kind of an unknown time. Like, was it difficult to kind of get funding and get people to sign on, or was the area just kind of generally a nicer place to be than some of the other places that had more severe lockdowns and kind of worse infections?
I don't, as I said, Malta was sort of like a bit more relaxed. People were starting to panic. They'd be like, oh, what's happening with the pandemic? And they were actually counting numbers every day. So every time you put the news on, there's this health minister coming on, oh, 200 cases today or 60 cases today. And it wasn't that high. I don't think when it began, it was only a few like 60, 70 cases. It started rising in the later years, but in the later year of the pandemic. But yeah, because we work with a small crew anyway, like the most people we had on set at one time was 8. I think there was like a restriction as to how many people you could have, like in groups. I don't know if it was 6, but I don't know if we had more than 6 or 8 people, like max, one day. Like we only had Ivan and I directing. I was doing the production design, one actor. If we had another actor, it was only 2 actors on one day together. Yeah. And the other guy was like on the phone. So it was like we weren't in close contact all the time. Obviously we were on set together, but we were wearing masks. We did the temperature checks and we did all that. And as I said, because we work with small crews, it wasn't like we're like, oh, how are we going to make this film work, you know? And it was all self-funded by Nexus Production Group, so money that we put in, and we had our own equipment, so we just used our own things to make this happen. And of course, we paid people, but we did that out of our own pockets, and we filmed in our apartment. So. Oh
wow, yeah. So this is kind of like your prototypical indie film, like, you know, using what you can, keeping it small. Like I love that aspect about this. This really does feel like, I mean, the film feels very indie, but it is like, I was amazed at how much you could do with, you know, what you had, especially given the constraints of the pandemic and also just the constraints of filming. So
yeah, because Ivan was on camera. We had like a second camera. We usually shoot with 2 cameras, so we had a second camera in for a couple of days because she was on another film, Yelenia, who we work with. Yeah, we just had another camera to come in. Sometimes we had a production assistant, me and Ivan directing. We had a lighting guy who was helping us with the lighting, and that was it. That was our crew, and an assistant to help me like with costumes and things like that. And a makeup artist came for a couple of days. That was it. Like on and off, we had between 6 to 8 people, sometimes less on a day.
That sounds perfect. Like that is a nice small crew. Had you worked with Steffi before, or how did you find her? You know, this seems like a intense project for her to take on. Like a lot of the film falls on her to kind of convey the emotion and convey the kind of fear. How did you kind of find her and get her to work on this?
I saw Steffi in a Shadina film. There's a production company called Shadina in Malta, which means monkey. And I fell in love with her in that film. It was a horror film based on a Maltese story written by a Maltese, was a novel. And I saw that film and I was like, oh my goodness, she's amazing. I want to work with Steffi one day. And Ivan saw the film after me, and then I watched it again with Ivan, and he was like, yeah, let's bring Steffi on board. So we actually got Steffi on board that way, but we had her in mind for our other film, Incorpore. We also shot that in Malta, partly in Malta, in 4 different countries, and we had her in mind for that. But at that time, she was living in London, and she was like, "Oh, I'm coming down for a wedding at this time." And we're trying to work it out, but we're like, "No, we can't cast her; it's not going to work." But we had her in mind because we saw her in that Camilla film, the short film Camilla, and then we were like, "Yeah, let's work with Steffi." So, and Steffi said yes. So
that sounds perfect. And one of the scenes I absolutely loved, it was a very early scene, is just, it's like the first scene in the film where she spends, I don't know, like 5 minutes going through her kind of pandemic routine. Like, how, was it always that intense? Like, did you kind of increase it as you were doing it just to like see how far it could go? Like, I love the just kind of meticulous care that happened during that scene, and the fact that, you know, you would, in most movies, you think, okay, they're going to speed this up, but no, you like went through every aspect of what she did to kind of show the burden that this, you know, was putting on her.
Yeah, we told Steph to do that in real time. So whatever she felt the character would do, like she had the bucket there and everything, and she knew she was going to wash the shoes and all that. But we just said to her, do it as Maria would do it, like do it in full Maria mode. And before that, prior, we had rehearsal with her, so she knew how Maria walked. She knew the mannerisms of Maria, because we do a lot of heavy, intense work with her before, because it's like improvised. She doesn't know exactly what we want until we work with her to build the character. Or like, so that's how we do rehearsals. We go back in time. So she had the mannerisms. She already had the anxiety because she's been working with the other actors as well beforehand to try to get Maria's feelings and her anxiety out. So when she did that part, it was just her being Maria, like immensely in the character. And we just did it in real time. We just sat back with the camera and said, how would Maria do it? And we just let her do it. So Steffi did it as Maria.
That is awesome. And I love that she was so like ready to be this character right at the start of the film. I assume it was one of the earlier scenes that you filmed. I guess I don't know. Maybe it was the last one. Who knows? But yeah,
Yeah, it was
it was
one
perfect
of
for
the
her.
first, I believe. I don't actually remember. I think it was one of the first. It was a really intense shoot. It was really busy.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to kind of set her up, right? Like I loved watching it because I was like, this is like I kept waiting for it to kind of cut forward, but no, I loved that it just kind of went through the process. So
It was like that pretentious scene in A Ghost Story where she just eats the cake for like 10 minutes. For like, let's do one of those. But I think
exactly.
it was a good way. It was a good way to actually set up the character because we don't have anything prior to that. We just see her running home, and then it's just like, what is she doing? And she takes everything that you learned, like, oh, wash your clothes, keep your clothes clean. She takes everything to the extreme, which is like setting it up for the rest of the film that she's just very intense.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of some of the intensity of the film, later on, there are a significant number of insects that materialize. What was that like? I assume you had some specialists to do that, or maybe your apartment just got infested. I don't know exactly what happened, but what was that like? Because that was a very intense scene. I was like, how did they do this in like an indie budget and in the confines of this area? Like, what was that like to film?
We didn't tell our landlord that we were filming. And we tried to clean all the worms, but even when we finished, like we moved the furniture because we were actually moving out like a week after we finished filming. So we were moving furniture and we were finding dead worms everywhere behind like cabinets and stuff because they just got wherever they wanted to go. But yeah, that was all real time because that was all real worms. And Steffi knew a guy called Rob who we know of and we've worked with before. He was like one of our assistants on the day, and he actually is a bit of a nerd and he loves all these insects and worms, and him and Steffi have a lot of reptiles and things like that. So she's like, he can get you some worms. Like, we need a lot of worms. And it's like getting it by the kilo. Oh, how many kilos do you want? How many worms of this? I can get these red ones. And it was like, so we were calling him the worm wrangler because he had a lot of worms and he knew where to get them. So he was our worm guy. So yeah, we can thank Rob for all those disgusting worms.
That sounds perfect. I love like you're moving there, like, oh my gosh, like we have to leave this apartment because there's all these worms around. Like,
We've done worse than that, and we had to paint ceilings once. So
oh my gosh. Well, you gotta do what you gotta do to get the film made, right?
yeah.
And one thing I did want to ask, I'll try to keep it kind of spoiler free, but as like you mentioned, as the film progresses, you learn more and more about Maria's past trauma and what happened to her. But at least in my mind, the film gives you, I think, enough to kind of jump to some conclusions, but you never get like I don't know, a full picture or like an exact reproduction of what happened to her. Was that intentional? Did you want to intentionally keep some aspects of that hidden, or was that like by design, or is there another cut that maybe has more that did happen to her? Like, how was that process?
That's interesting because some people didn't even pick up on it. Like a couple of people that watched, they were like, "Oh, I didn't even realize that was happening." I'm like, "How could you not realize that was happening? Like,
It's such a huge part.
Why is she crazy?" Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that didn't really go anywhere. Like, it was just part of her cycle to get her where she was in the trauma, I think. So we didn't actually plan to like have anything. It's just that when the pandemic hit, these thoughts came back to her, and there were thoughts that she had repressed in her subconscious. So they came back. And then the whole idea of not being cleaned from what happened and then not being clean from the pandemic. So it was just another force for her to fight against during the pandemic, so during the film. So didn't really have, like, the meaning was to just have an instigator for her and to also to talk a little bit about the mental illness side of it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely some of the things that she was hearing, probably because of what happened, did contribute to her, like you said, feeling of uncleanliness that contributed to her overall paranoia about the situation. And maybe it also contributed to some of the reasons why she didn't want to go other places and maybe feel comfortable with other people. So that, all of that was definitely important. So
definitely.
Awesome. So I know we have limited time. I want to switch. I call it the lightning round. They're just lightweight questions about the film. With this film, it's tough to have many lightweight questions, but I do my best. You can feel free not to answer any of them. I will not be offended at all, but I try to keep them very answerable. The first question is, in the film, Maria had food delivered because she didn't want to go outside. When was the last time that you had, either groceries or takeout delivered?
I had Uber delivered not Uber, it was Bolt Food the other day, and I have a cold. So I was like hiding behind the door, and the guy's probably thinking, what the hell's going on? So I was hiding behind the door. I was like, just put it out there, okay? And I'm like trying to take the bag off him. So just the other day.
That actually sounds exactly like what happened in the film too. You're like, can you just leave and please go away? That's.
I hope I don't yell at someone like that about the food, but it hasn't happened yet.
I mean, you gotta get your food, right? If you're hungry, you're hungry. You just want the food now. So, um, when was the last time you had an infestation? And maybe it was when you were filming this film, but when was the last time you had an infestation outside of this movie, or maybe you never had one?
Of insects.
Yeah.
I can't ever think of that. I don't even know when. No idea. The last time I had that many, I was close to that many insects was on the film. Yeah. But in Australia where I live, like I went to Cairns, like and I remember just being attacked by mozzies, like a lot of mozzies, like you shower and then the next minute you're just covered in mozzie bites and you're all sweaty again. So that's probably the last time I remember having that many insects around me. It's
That sounds awful. I think I would rather have an infestation of worms than that, because at least the worms
covered in sweat and getting attacked by mozzies. Yeah.
Have you ever eaten insects, like fried insects, cooked insects?
No.
Okay. Have you ever broken your phone intentionally or unintentionally?
Broken my phone.
Mm-hmm.
I always break my phone. Somehow I have a thing of like the charger. I must be really savage. I keep like breaking the charger connection that's like inside the phone. I've had 2 phones broke that way.
Oof. Well,
Actually, and that was my phone that we smashed in the film.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Again, sacrificing everything for the art. I love it.
Old one.
When was the last time you called in sick for work?
I never call in sick. I'm too much of a goody two shoes. And now I don't really have a boss. I work for myself. So I've been in bed the last 5 days. So
You're gonna have this internal pep talk like, yo, like we have to get this done. You are getting up. You're not calling in sick.
I don't like to take breaks. It's really hard for me to relax. I was in bed before popping like my Panadols and I was still working. I was just lying there with the laptop like propped up on my belly trying to work. So I hardly take breaks.
That sounds like the life of an indie filmmaker. So that makes perfect sense. Do you like your landlord, or maybe you don't have a landlord?
Yeah, our landlord's cool. We like
Perfect.
our landlord. He's not like the one in the film.
Perfect. So during the height of the pandemic, how much time did you spend cleaning? Or maybe it never got too bad in Malta, so you didn't have to worry too much about it.
The houses are very dusty in Malta. So you have to dust a lot. So I did clean a bit, because if you have the windows open, and even just inside, because we have the sands, that we have like the limestone houses, so that gets really dusty in there if you have an old house of character. So quite a lot. But I didn't clean too much before the shoot because I knew Steffi would clean it.
I love that. It's just you're utilizing it to the most. On a scale of 1 to 10, what was your kind of like pandemic fear level, if you want to disclose?
I myself have anxiety. So when we were at work, they were actually hyping it up, because when it hit, I was working as a temp. I was actually working full time in Malta because the rent was a little bit more expensive and it was a different situation then. So I was in an office and we were all sitting in these really small cubicles, but we're right next to people.
Oh, wow.
And they were saying, if we hear anyone cough, you're going to be sent home. If anyone's got the runny nose, you're going to be sent home. They were like really like diligent. But then they wouldn't send us home until like they didn't know if they're going to close the businesses or if they're going to do this. And we're hearing all this stuff about the pandemic, and we're like, do we go work from home? Can we work from home? And there wasn't enough laptops to go around for people at home. We're like, what's going to happen? So that was like really the height of it. And I started being like, oh my God, am I going to get sick? Because like I've got a 93-year-old grandma as well. So if I go to visit her, I was a bit worried about that. But that's like, for me, yeah. It's a bit stressful.
That sounds like a very reasonable, tough situation. Like that sounds awful. Like especially at the start of the pandemic, like when we don't know what's happening, like how it's spread, how difficult, like how contagious it is. Like that sounds terrible. So
yeah,
I understand. I understand the high level there. And the last question is, so in this film, Maria takes a kind of sudden trip during the movie. When was the last time you took like a sudden trip, just an off the cuff trip, or maybe you had to travel quickly for some emergency? When was the last time you just had to like grab a suitcase, throw stuff in and get out of there?
We plan a little bit better than Maria, but yeah, not recently. Like I went to Australia, like we planned to go to Australia for like a month or so in December. We ended up staying there for 5 months. So that was kind of unplanned. So we stayed there for 5 months and we just got back. So maybe that, but we're really bad at packing light. So we pack everything. I think we had like 3 suitcases when we came back. So that's our computer gear and our film gear as well.
5 months. I mean, I don't know. I think I would probably ship like a crate out for 5 months somewhere. So that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And so the film is out. It's coming out on digital May 20th, 2022. So people can check it out. You probably want to rent it and watch it in the comfort of your own home, so you can make sure that all the windows are closed and it's all clean. But the film will be out. People can check it out. What do you have next after they see Machination? What can people look for next from you?
We're trying to independently release Cats of Malta, so we're looking forward to releasing that next, and then we're looking at shooting something this summer as well. So I'm still writing that, and hopefully soon on to draft 2. Yeah, but other than that, Machination, and then Cats of Malta, which is our documentary about the Cats of Malta.
Perfect. That's that's kind of the two things about the pandemic, right? Like extreme fear and then like the internet and cats. So I love it. It works perfectly. It's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Sarah Jayne Portelli, the co-director of Machination, which I said is coming to digital on May 20th, 2022. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was Sarah Jayne Portelli, the co-director of Machination, which is coming to digital on May 20th, 2022. It's a pandemic horror film that looks at how the news and advice from people and her own pre-existing traumas could have affected someone and caused them to go to some extreme measures. If you like this interview, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.